Let's have a nice cup of TRE in the afternoon with Hannah Murray.
Joining us on the line now is Tilar J. Mazzeo. She is a New York Times best-selling author of more than half a dozen non-fiction cultural histories, including Widow Cliquot, now a major Hollywood film. Her latest book, To the Edge of the World, which was selected as a BBC Radio 4 Book of the Week, is a thrilling work of feminist history and adventure on the high seas. It's the astonishing true story of a captain's wife forced to take the helm in the most perilous seas, beating the odds at the brink of Antarctica to save herself, her husband, and their crew. Welcome to the show, Tilar.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. And what a fascinating story. How and when and where did you come across it?
Well, my husband and I are also avid sailors, so we happened to be out sailing remote somewhere where there was no cell phone service and no wireless coverage, and became desperate and started reading in the ship's library and happened to come across a paragraph reference to her in a book about Cape Horn. And I thought, I bet there's a story there.
Gosh, so can you tell us a bit about her story and what happened? This was in late 19th century, wasn't it?
That's right. So most of the story is set in about 1856. So this is the peak of the gold rush in California. It's also the height of the clipper ship era. And the best way to think about the clipper ships is that they were, the kind of just-in-time part of the supply chain. These are ships that are built for speed, but not for safety. And so her husband is a sea captain, and the dream of every sea captain is to race the clipper ships. They were kind of the race cars of the day. And he was commissioned to take some supplies for the gold rush, mostly groceries, from New York to San Francisco. And of course, back then you had to go the long way around because there was no Panama Canal. And that meant you had to go through the tip of Tierra del Fuego and through what is known as Drake's Passage, which is some of the most dangerous waters in the world. So they decided they were in love and couldn't bear to be parted and went together with the results that you mentioned, the terrible storm they run into down there on their second circumnavigation.
So how and why did she have to take over?
Well, so what happens is this is also the height of the tuberculosis epidemic in North America and across Europe. And he doesn't know it, but when they were home visiting her father, she grew up in a very poor immigrant community in the north end of Boston, and not very good living conditions, and boats also tended to be places where diseases pass easily. He ended up contracting tuberculosis, and they don't know it. And they set off out of New York. Their trusted first mate has broken his leg the day before they're supposed to set sail. And the ship's owners have refused his request to call off the journey until he can get a trusted first mate. So they put in place somebody else who's a criminal, ultimately, as his second in command. And so they're setting off down the coast of South America. But the first mate ends up revealing that he's a criminal, ends up getting put in leg irons in the brig, which means that Joshua, when he is sick, has to take the helm for 8 straight days, and he collapses just as they are coming into the most dangerous part of that transit. And at that point, she has to decide the second mate can't take charge because he's illiterate and he can't therefore navigate. So she either has to let the criminal first mate take control of the ship, and she's pretty sure that she and Joshua won't survive if that happens, or she has to take the helm herself, and that's what she does.
Wow, amazing. So has she had any training in what to do?
No, she's 19 years old when this unfolds. She's also pregnant with her first child.
Oh, my goodness.
She's a very petite woman. The crew talk about the fact that she was not 5 feet tall. She was a very, very pretty, petite, pregnant young woman. And she had no training at all. They didn't train women to be sea captains in the 1850s, but she had already done with Joshua and with much of that crew one circumnavigation, where they had gone from New York to San Francisco and then to Hong Kong and then to London with the spring tea, and then back to New York. So she had learned on that journey, mostly out of boredom, celestial navigation, which of course before GPS was how you knew where in the world you were and how to get where you wanted to go. So she had learned a lot in the first 2 years at sea.
Gosh, amazing. So is it giving it away to tell us what happened?
I don't think so. We already know the worst of it, right? So what happens is Joshua collapses and she and the second mate take the helm. And then that first mate down in the brig in chains begins agitating and saying he really deserves to be in charge of the ship. And after about 3 days, they're on the brink of a mutiny. And she, in this very dramatic, it's the moment, we don't have her words. We only have the reports of the crew who dined out and drank out in taverns on this story for the rest of their lives. So we have their account of what happened on the ship. And they say that she came and she simply asked the crew not to mutiny and to trust her. And they agreed that they would acclaim her as captain. So that's the first moment in history when a woman becomes the captain of a merchant vessel. And then after she's acclaimed captain, they run into an 18-day gale. And she decides in the end that the only way they're going to survive is to try to escape the storm, which heads them right towards Antarctica. And they end up in icebergs, ultimately after 18 days in which she didn't change her clothes at all during that period. They are finally able to make it around Cape Horn, and then they do make it ultimately to San Francisco. They're in a race. Astonishingly, they they come up second in that race. Some of the other people, other sea captains did not survive. There were ships that went down in that race that they were on. And then she has to get her very, very sick husband back to Boston overland via Panama.
Gosh, unbelievable. And why isn't she and this story more well known? You'd think it would be a big Hollywood blockbuster. Maybe it will be now your book's out.
Isn't it? It's so funny to me, the things that we choose to forget and we choose to remember. I mean, in 1856, when they arrived in San Francisco with Joshua very, very ill, and then when they do arrive back in Boston, well, they arrive first in New York and then travel to Boston, the story is everywhere internationally. There are news reports in New York and in San Francisco. There's a poet in London who writes a poem called Neptune's Car, A Tale of New York. I mean, she's absolutely an international celebrity, in part because the ship's owners then refused to pay her this captain's salary, which they need to survive economically because she was a woman and they hadn't hired her, but her husband. So at that point, there's a fundraising, a kind of GoFundMe, enterprise that goes to donate money to Mrs. Patton. So she's very, very well known at that period compared to Florence Nightingale and George Washington. And then briefly again during the period of the suffragette movement, her story helps to pass the 19th Amendment in the United States at the beginning of the 20th century. And then otherwise, her story really does fall. It falls into the shadows of history. So hopefully the book will give her moment in the limelight once again for a brief time.
Oh, definitely. And am I right in saying that you have undertaken the same journey that she did?
I did, yes. I got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities in the United States because it was considered a story of cultural importance for the North American, history. And so I was able to go to Antarctica. She didn't make it as far as Antarctica, of course. I was able to make it that far and to see Cape Horn. Unfortunately, I was the only one aboard the ship hoping for bad weather in Drake's Passage and a terrible gale. We did not get a terrible gale, and I was the only one rooting for it.
You wanted it to be authentic.
Yeah, I wanted something to write about, right? How can I write about 40-foot seas unless we experience it? So, I wasn't very popular on that ship.
No, I bet. And I want to ask you about Widow Clicquot. I really want to see the film again. It sounds like an amazing story. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, that was my first nonfiction book, and that is an amazing story. That's a story of a woman named Barbe Nicole Ponsardin Clicquot. If you know Veuve Clicquot Champagne, that's the house that she founded. And what happens is her husband and she really wanted to begin a wine business. He hadn't been trained in doing it at all. He tries it and he fails spectacularly, and then he dies. And she goes to her father-in-law, who's very wealthy, and says, "Would you please give me a chance to run your son's champagne house and see if I can do this?" And astonishingly, the father-in-law says yes. And she runs the business. This is the period of the Napoleonic Wars. She's also failing terribly until she comes up with the idea to run the blockades and the embargoes during the Napoleonic Wars and to get her champagne to Russia. And she's the first French champagne to arrive there at the end of the wars. And within 30 days of the arrival of her champagne in Russia, she's also an international celebrity and becomes the first woman to run a major international champagne house. So you can see the theme here. I'm interested in intrepid women with audacity who find a way to carve out their own paths in history.
Yeah, amazing story, and you can see why it was made into a film. Any thoughts that this might be made into a film?
We're always having those talks, so we're having conversations in Hollywood about that. But what I've learned about Hollywood is that it doesn't mean anything until the day filming starts. So fingers crossed.
Yes, fingers crossed, absolutely. Well, if people want to find out more about this amazing story, the book is called To the Edge of the World, A Perilous Storm, A Mutinous Crew, and the Woman Who Defied Them All. It's available on our website, tre.radio, in the bookshop section, and it's by Tilar J. Mazzeo. Tilar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day.